Okay, let's dive right into this one. Welcome back to another Explainer, where we take a deep, structured look at some of the most baffling mysteries in history. Now, I want you to picture the scene. It's March 3rd, 1984. You're standing in this dark, damp, echoing London tube tunnel. The air smells faintly of ozone and old dust. It's a Saturday night, well past midnight, and the city up above is slowly shutting down. But down below, in the subterranean labyrinth of the London Underground, a total nightmare is just about to unfold. This is the story of a cold case that Scotland Yard called their absolute worst nightmare. A case that, 40 years later, remains completely unsolved. We are looking at the terrifying true story of the ghost train killer.
You know, the chilling math of this case is an equation that's basically going to keep you awake tonight. If you're someone who likes to solve puzzles, well, this is where it starts. 3 people boarded the carriage, but by the time morning broke, 2 of them were dead. And the third person? They literally vanished into thin air. No witnesses, no murder weapon left behind, no CCTV to capture a face, nothing. We're dealing with an impossible equation here. 2 victims, 1 killer, and a completely enclosed, moving crime scene where the only survivor evaporated like a ghost.
So, let's anchor ourselves in the clinical facts of the timeline. Everything we're about to discuss happened within a very specific, agonizingly quiet window of time. At exactly 12:30 a.m., the last Northern Line train of the night boards at Camden Town. It's almost completely empty, traveling its final route down to Kennington. And for 4.5 hours, that train just sits there in the darkness of the Kennington depot after finishing its run. Then, at 5 a.m., the morning cleaners arrive. They step up to the carriage, unlock and open the train doors to begin their normal shift, and they're met with a scene of absolute horror. To understand how this even happened, we need to break down exactly who was on that final train. Because to solve a mystery, you really have to look at the intersecting paths that led people to the exact same place at the exact same time.
Chapter 1. The Last Northern Line Trade. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between these 2 men. These were just 2 completely ordinary guys living their lives whose trajectories fatefully collided on that near-empty carriage. On one hand, you've got Michael Harrison. He's 28 years old, totally exhausted, and just heading home after working a late shift. He's just looking to get some rest. On the other hand, we have David Martin, 31 years old. He's had a long night out in Camden, he's drunk, and he's basically just trying to find his way back to bed after the pub's closed. 2 totally different nights out, ending up in the exact same carriage on the last train south.
And then there was the third passenger. We have absolutely nothing on this man. Unknown name, unknown face. We don't know his age, his background, his motive, or even where he came from. All we know as an undeniable, chilling fact is that he was on that train with Michael and David. He sat right there in that echoing, rattling carriage as it plummeted into the dark tunnels under London. A complete blank slate of a human being sharing a nearly empty metal box with 2 men who were about to die.
Chapter 2. An impossible locked room escape. Which brings us to the discovery at the depot, and the core paradox of this entire case. What those cleaners found at 5 a.m. completely defied all logic and physical reality. Michael Harrison was found slumped in his seat. He had suffered 17 brutal stab wounds to his neck. 17. The sheer violence and speed of the attack was devastating.
David Martin was found collapsed on the floor of the carriage. He had suffered 9 devastating stab wounds to his chest. Again, a rapid, frantic, and just incredibly violent assault.
So, the crucial point is this. Take a long, hard look at the facts of the crime scene. Blood was absolutely everywhere. On the seats, on the walls, pooling on the floor. It was clearly a frenzied, chaotic event in a very confined space. But police searched every single inch of that carriage, and there was no weapon found. Nothing. And here is the fact that's going to make the hair on your arm stand up. The train doors were locked from the inside. Let me repeat that. The doors were secured from the inside.
So, how did he get out? I want you to just sit with that question for a second. To kill 2 men in a tiny enclosed space with a knife, take the weapon with you, and then somehow escape a train that is locked from the inside without a single person seeing you? I mean, it requires either meticulous, terrifying planning or absolute reckless madness. It physically shouldn't be possible, but the killer did it.
Chapter 3. Theories behind the ghost.
With an impossible crime scene on their hands, detectives at Scotland Yard had to mobilize and begin a desperate search for answers.
But we really have to look at this through the lens of 1984, because the technological landscape at the time severely crippled the investigation from day one. The investigative hurdles were massive. Today, if a crime happens on public transport, it's caught on a dozen high-definition cameras. In 1984, there was zero CCTV on the tube. None. There was also no modern forensic DNA testing. They couldn't just swab the seats to find a genetic profile of the killer. So Scotland Yard had to rely entirely on old-school legwork. They conducted over 200 interviews. They physically walked into every single pub in Camden asking if anyone saw anything strange, releasing sketches based on the vaguest of guesses, and it yielded absolutely nothing, a complete dead end.
And this brilliantly illustrates the two totally divergent paths the police were forced to walk down. Let's look at the two main theories impartially here. Theory 1 suggests the killer was tube staff. Why? Well, because you'd need an intimate knowledge of the train schedules, the depot layouts, and the unseen locked maintenance exits to vanish from a sealed train like that. It implies cold, calculated inside knowledge. Theory 2 swings the completely opposite way, the drifter. This theory suggests a homeless man who regularly slept on night trains simply snapped in a moment of extreme rage and then blindly fled into the dark, dangerous tunnels on foot, slipping away into the underground network.
Adding a truly terrifying layer to these theories is the pattern that emerged later. In 1985, and again in 1987, there were two more nighttime stabbings on the Northern Line. The exact same geographic pattern, the exact same operating environment. But despite the massive similarities, investigators could never definitively link these later attacks to our ghost train killer through hard evidence. Was it a copycat, or was the ghost still riding the rails? We simply don't know.
Chapter 4. A Cold Case Indoors.
As the years turned into decades, the physical evidence gathered dust, and the trail went completely cold. But we can't just look at this as a puzzle to be solved. Behind the clinical facts of a police file, there are families trapped in a state of suspended grief. Michael Harrison's brother really summed up the tragedy perfectly. He was just going home, that's all. It strips away the true crime spectacle and just leaves us with the raw, devastating tragedy of it all. A 28-year-old man, tired from working a late shift, sitting down on a train seat, fully expecting to wake up in his bed. He did nothing wrong. He was just going home.
And we see the exact same agonizing reality for David Martin's family. His sister stated, "We never got justice. We never got answers." Imagine waking up every single day for 4 decades, knowing your brother was brutally taken from you, and knowing that the person who did it simply walked away into the shadows. The complete lack of closure is a heavy, heavy weight these families carry every single day.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this built, how this agony compounds across the history of the case itself. In 1984, the murders occur and the trail goes instantly cold. Then, skip all the way ahead to 2014, 30 whole years later. Out of nowhere, a man walks into a station and actually confesses to the killings. You can imagine the shock and the sudden surge of hope for the investigators and the families. But, actually, scratch that. That hope was cruel and short-lived. It turned out the man was severely mentally ill, and his confession was completely fabricated. A devastating false dawn. Which brings us to today, where the Metropolitan Police file remains open, stamped clearly with 2 words: cold case.
It's vital to ground this in our own reality and consider the stark contrast. Today, when you commute, you are surrounded by a web of security. There are cameras at the turnstiles, on the platforms, and right inside the carriages. The modern tube is a highly monitored, safe environment. We take that surveillance totally for granted. But the 1984 London tube was a vastly different, vastly more vulnerable world. It was basically a subterranean frontier. And on March 3rd of that year, the lack of eyes in the dark allowed a killer to commit a perfect, terrifying crime.
Which leaves us right back where we started, staring into the dark tunnel, trying to see a face that just isn't there. Was it a calculated staff member using their intimate knowledge of the system? Was it a desperate drifter slipping into the blackness of the tunnels? Or was it simply a madman who got incredibly, impossibly lucky? Who was the ghost train killer? I want you to really think about the evidence we've structured here today. Weigh the impossible logistics, the locked doors, the empty carriages. Form your own hypothesis. Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because keeping the details of these cold cases alive in our minds is really the only way we fight back against the darkness. Thank you so much for joining me.